Hi, Sally. It's a pleasure to
Hello.
have you with us.
Hi, Sally. Very good to have you with us in this afternoon.
And I'm delighted to be here, Anna and Martha.
Great. So, Sally, let me introduce you. Sally Duplantier is the founder of Zing. Her platform goes myzinglife.com. And her mission is to help people live their best life longer through lifestyle choices that lead to better health. And she has a certificate in nutrition science from Stanford University. She is currently a graduate student at the University of Southern California, studying the science of aging. And she has recently published a paper on the link between diet and cognitive health. So, Sally, you can start.
All right. Well, I'm so delighted to be here and to be talking with your audience about something that I am really passionate about. So here's what kind of prompted my research and this presentation. It intrigues me when I think about older adults, and by older adults, I'm talking about men and women in their 50s and beyond. And I think about what are the unique dietary needs of these older adults that are not only going to help mitigate disease risk, but also to help them thrive. So I started doing this research about a year ago, but what I found was that it's not that easy to answer this question for a couple of reasons. Part of it is that older adults become more heterogeneous as they age. If we look at a group of 55-year-old women and we compare them to a group of 35-year-old women, those 55-year-old women are going to have a lot more differences, especially in terms of their physical health and how they look, how they appear, because there's a difference in terms of our chronologic age and our biologic age. And a lot of that has to do with our lifestyle. So this is one reason it's hard to answer that question. Another reason it's hard to answer this question is experts don't agree on what's the best. I just pulled a couple studies here related to protein. How much protein do older adults need? Well, there's two sides of this discussion. How about vitamin D? Well, the experts don't agree on that. And those are just two small examples. The third reason that it's kind of hard to answer this question is that the tools we have are not that helpful. Now, as you know, I'm based here in California. I have a kind of a US-centric view of things, but I think things are going to be similar in Brazil. So your dietitians, similar to ours, our registered dietitians, have something called dietary reference intakes. It's pages and pages of data that are just not that helpful to the lay person. So given that, I'm still going to try to answer the question, and I am going to be answering the question about what food should we eat, what should we avoid, based on my research and kind of my perspective in terms of the way I've been trained. So I'm classically trained in nutrition science from Stanford and also trained in the study of aging from USC. And as you mentioned, I recently published a paper in Nutrients that looks at this link between diet and cognition. There's different points of view, there's different pieces of research, and I welcome questions related to that. I also want to stress that this isn't medical advice. So, if somebody has a specific question about, their own health, always check with your doctor. So I'm going to start first by talking about physiology, how our bodies change and our minds change as we age. And then I'm going to link it to nutrients. And my goal for all of the people who are observing this today is that they can apply just even one or two ideas to their own dietary habits. And Anna and Martha, I hope you can too.
Of course.
Our focus today is going to be on generally healthy older adults. So I'm going to kind of thinking about changes that start to occur mid-50s and beyond. All right, let's start with physiology. And I'm going to have you meet Jane Doe. So this is Jane. She's 55. She's 5'3", weighs 140 pounds. She has a body mass index, which is a measure we use here in the US to kind of gauge overall kind of health, of 24.8, and that number is normal. So even though Jane always wants to lose a few pounds, for her height and weight, she's considered normal. But here's what's interesting about Jane. At 55, she weighs the same that she did in her 40s. That's the good news. However, she doesn't really look the same, and part of that is because her body fat percentage has increased. So this is an opinion poll. Anna and Martha, you can play along. Our audience can answer this question to themselves. Why has her body fat increased with age? Is it because Jane is more sedentary? Is it because she has less lean muscle? Or is it due to menopause? And you can pick as many of these as you want. What do you think?
I think it's B and C.
You think it's B and C. All right. How about you, Anna?
It could be a bit of ABC.
It could be a bit of ABC. Well, this was interesting to me, is that it is mostly A and B. We blame menopause for everything, and I'm going to touch on that. But this increase in body fat is less to do with menopause and more to do with these first two. So let me just show you this graph. So the amount of calories we burn every day has to do with our metabolism. Metabolism is it's a fancy way of saying how we intake fuel and how we burn that for energy. And it really consists of three things. The biggest amount of our calories burned today is something called our resting metabolic rate. And that's the amount of calories that we need every day, just if we're laying in bed, not eating, just laying in bed. It's a big chunk, it keeps our organs moving, it keeps our organs going. Then on top of that, we have activity and lifestyle. That's just walking to your parked car. It's running an errand, it may be walking the dog, something very kind of light. And then on top of that, we have exercise, where we may go to the gym or go to some kind of fitness class. What happens as we get older is that typically we don't exercise as much, and typically we aren't as active. And again, I'm saying typically. What happens in those cases is that the body gets very smart and it starts lowering its resting metabolic rate. So even at rest, you need less energy. The other problem is because we exercise less and we don't use our muscles as much, those muscles atrophy and we have more body fat. Body fat, interestingly enough, does not burn calories as much as muscle, so that lowers our metabolic rate even more. So the problem is mostly because we're less active and we don't exercise as much. Now, there was a really interesting study that was just published. And when I say just published, I think it came out a week or two ago. And it was about changes in metabolism across the lifespan. And what researchers found that was kind of surprising, and I think is appropriate for this audience, is that, oops, sorry, I have to go back one here. I was trying to move my slide here, is that, from infancy to age 1, metabolism goes up. From 1 to 20, it slows at about 3% per year. But then look at this. There's really not a change in our metabolism between 20 and 60. But then after age 60, it starts to decline. And when I say that, I'm not talking about the metabolism that's due to less exercise or activity. I'm just talking about, does the body itself slow down? Which means that we blame a lot of things on our metabolism when it's really not true. And even after 60, it's only decreasing a little bit. So in addition to more body fat and lower resting metabolic rate, Jane also is going through menopause. And, this is a good graph that just shows how hormone levels decrease. And menopause can be anywhere between 40 and 60, and the kinds of symptoms people experience can be very mild to very severe. I've listed a few of these. I think for your audience, many people are familiar with the difficulty sleeping, night sweats. I know this is going to be translated, so I'm going to read these. Irregular periods, the dry skin, dry vaginal membranes, chills or hot flashes, and mood swings. And then there's just a host of other challenges that people can have, from migraine headaches to to other kinds of problems. So menopause is actually a change that we go through, but it's not the cause of increased body fat per se. But Jane has some other things going on. And again, these changes will start to occur maybe mid to late 50s and beyond. So there's changes in the vascular system. And the vascular system is the connection, this collection of veins and arteries that run throughout the body. And the walls of our arteries start to thicken and stiffen. And then the endothelium, which is the lining of these arteries, it stops operating as efficiently. There's a dysfunction. These two factors increase the risk of a number of different diseases. So hypertension, which is high blood pressure, stroke, arterial sclerosis, which is the buildup of plaque and calcium on the inside of the artery near the heart, and even certain types of dementia, especially vascular dementia. So as Jane ages, she's going to be at greater risk for these diseases. But I'm going to keep going because Jane also has changes in the brain. Now, there is some normal shrinkage of the brain, both the white matter and the gray matter, as we age. And that does not indicate dementia or even mild cognitive impairment. But people can develop mild cognitive impairment. You can see a picture here where there are more plaques and tangles in the brain, more white matter lesions. And then in some cases, mild cognitive impairment can become Alzheimer's or another type of dementia. So older age does not in itself signify mild cognitive impairment or Alzheimer's, but it is a risk factor. Okay, Jane also has changes in her digestive system. So older adults will have increased digestive problems, and this could be irritable bowel syndrome, for example, an actual kind of syndrome. It could be just challenges related to reduced stomach acid, where it then becomes more difficult to digest food. And one of the things we see with older adults is that it's harder to absorb certain types of nutrients. Vitamin B12, calcium, magnesium, and iron, those are some of the critical ones that we may eat enough of, but we actually don't absorb enough. There are also changes in Jane's gut microbiota, and I have a whole discussion on this one. But the microbiota are the healthy bacteria that are in our stomach. They actually weigh about 3 pounds. They weigh about as much as our brain. And you know what? We have to keep them fed because there's this symbiotic relationship. A healthy gut microbiota, a young one, looks like a lush and plentiful garden where there is lots of variety of plants and everything's pretty healthy. The aging microbiota doesn't look so good. There is a few plants, but notice that there's a lot more weeds. So there's less of the good bacteria and more of the bad bacteria, the less healthy bacteria. Jane has, I'm almost done with Jane. I know it's a lot, but she also experiences low-level chronic inflammation. This is associated with aging, and there aren't outward symptoms of it. But what we see is that in almost every chronic disease, there's a link between the disease and chronic inflammation. Diabetes, metabolic disorder, cardiovascular disease, stroke, cancer, chronic kidney disease, Parkinson's, and Alzheimer's. And we don't know if those diseases cause inflammation, chronic inflammation, or vice versa, but we know there's a link. And so, we talk a lot about ways to reduce chronic inflammation. Here's the last one, oxidative stress. Here's the best way I can explain this. Just like a car rusts, and you get one little tiny spot of rust, and then pretty soon you have a big section of rust. Well, we rust too. It's called oxidative stress, but it's the same kind of effect. And so it's changes that occur to our cells at the molecular level. You and your audience may have heard of something called free radicals. These are unstable molecules, and what helps them become stable is an antioxidant. Our body produces antioxidants naturally, but you can also eat certain foods with antioxidants to better protect against oxidative stress. So I know this is a long list, and it's kind of a scary list. And your audience is on the young side of some of these changes, but they are changes that occur as we get older. And so something that I've asked myself when I was studying the science of aging is from a Christmas carol, are these the things that must be or might be? In other words, is all of this going to happen to me or you, or how much can we affect this? And, we will all age at some point. Cellular aging is going to happen, but we can slow it down. And I think that's really the good news. And that's the work I'm doing. The good news is that lifestyle choices, including diet, make a difference. And so when I talk about lifestyle choices, these are all the things that I study in my research, nutrition being one of them, and that's our focus today, but it's also movement, it's sleep, it's stress, and they all make a difference. So this is a key takeaway, and I think if people remember one thing, this is like one of my money slides, is that as we age, we need more nutritional value from our food, but we don't need as many calories. So more nutrition and less calories. And what that really means is that the food you eat needs to count. You don't eat it just because it tastes good. It's not even just because you're hungry, but because that food is information and it's going to help you age in a better way. So let's look at what to eat and what to avoid to help you based on those physiological changes. And I'm going to mostly talk today about macronutrients. I could come back and talk more about vitamins and minerals, but to keep within our time frame, this is what I'm going to focus on, which are the kinds of fats, protein, and carbohydrates that we need, what's going to be optimal and what's less optimal. So now this is a US standard, but I think you probably have something similar in Brazil. It's something called the acceptable macronutrient distribution range. Here in the US, it's set by the Institute of Medicine. And what it looks at is for adults, all adults, what percentage of our calories should come from fat, protein, and carbs? Most of us never even give that a second thought. And what was kind of interesting to me was that the ranges were so vast. But it's because in the populations we've studied, the blue zones where people live the longest, some of them eat a very high fat diet, and some of them eat a very high carb diet. And it's so hard to say what's right for everyone. So there is a range. But what's interesting here in the US is that there is no acceptable macronutrient distribution range specific to older adults. So I couldn't tell you the research says, here's what older adults should eat, because that research doesn't exist. But there's some agreement and there's some controversy. So let me start with the controversy. I think there's the most controversy over how much protein we need. So we here in the US have something called recommended dietary allowance. It's set by the USDA. It comes out every 5 years. New standards are applied. There's new research. And the RDA for people, whether it's protein or anything, vitamins, minerals, is 2 standard deviations higher than what most of us need. Most of us are at the top of a bell curve in terms of our needs, and we need an estimated average. But the RDA goes really overboard, and they say, okay, no, this might not fit everyone, so people need this much. Okay, so that's one thing to consider. But what's interesting with protein is that there are a number of studies that have been published that say we need twice the amount of protein as we get older. Twice the amount of protein. So that's a lot of protein. And I'm going to ask you guys another opinion. The reason that researchers say this is because muscle tends to waste as we get older. And so do you think just eating protein is going to build muscle?
No,
and the experts can't agree on this, so you guys vote because the experts don't agree.
I heard from my nutritionist, we have to exercise a lot and eat a certain, percentage of protein with your food, but
Yes.
you have to, without the exercise, it won't do the work.
Anna, that is exactly the studies that I've looked at over and over again support that. Just eating protein isn't going to build muscle. Eating protein and exercising, especially strength training, is going to help with muscle. I'm going to point to this study. So this was the Optimum study. It was a randomized clinical trial, which is the gold standard. 92 people, but that number was statistically significant. And they studied men 65 and older for a period of 6 months. The control group ate the RDA of protein, and the intervention group ate 60% more, or that 1.6 times. And the extra protein had no impact on their muscle mass, strength, or power. And it didn't improve their ability to walk or climb stairs or lift weight. You see, our bodies can't really use extra protein. Protein is kind of a use it or lose it. You eat a certain amount of protein at each meal, and the body uses it to build muscle, to build bone, to provide the body with instructions. And then if you overconsume protein, it just turns to carbs and fat in the body because there's no place to store it. So the other thing I want to point out is that a lot of foods contain protein. We think of protein coming from chicken or beef or seafood, but I use an app called MyNet Diary. I think this is available. I'm pretty sure it's a worldwide application. You can find it on your app store. But you can see here, let me have to move picture out of the way, that a lot of foods, even oatmeal, contains 5 grams of protein. Yeah, our hard-boiled egg has 6. This is Jane's breakfast. But even things like a half a piece of thin sliced bread have protein. So I think our obsession with protein is a bit overrated. And I just don't see how eating excess protein is going to help build muscle. Here's a formula that you can use. This again calculates that RDA for protein. It's 0.36 times your weight. So Jane's 140, 0.36 is about 50 grams a day. So she needs about 18 grams at each meal. It's not a lot of protein. Here in the US, we consume about 3 times the amount of protein we need. In the US, we're obsessed with protein. Okay. Let me take a look at the fats that we should eat. And you've probably heard this. Again, if you've worked with a nutritionist or just any guidelines, it's that all fat is not created equal, and that the source of fat is important, especially plant-based fats. And do you love my avocado affirmation? Good fat.
I love the avocado.
The avocado says that every morning because he's a plant-based fat. So eat more, eat less. Plant-based fats, good sources of these are nuts and seeds. Olive oil is an excellent source of plant-based fat. And then, as I mentioned, the avocado. But here's why. Again, when we think about Jane and we think about Jane and the physiology changes. These fats improve vascular health and may improve cognitive health. That's the recent study that I did on the link between diet and cognitive health. Animal-based fats are linked to increased risk of cardiovascular disease and chronic inflammation. Examples are red meat, butter, cheese, and our American Heart Association recommends limiting that amount of fat to about 5% of the calories daily. Our USDA guidelines are a little more lenient, 10%. 10% isn't a lot. If you eat 2,000 calories a day, which I think is high for most women in their 50s, but that would only be 200 calories a day at 10%, 2 tablespoons of butter. So it's not, like I said, it's not a lot. Okay, I'm sure you've heard this. Not all carbs are created equal. Eat more complex carbs. And the reason for this, for the complex carbs, remember I talked about gut health? Well, complex carbs are a prebiotic, and it actually contributes to a better and more diverse gut microbiome. In addition, these kinds of fruits and vegetables and grains have strong antioxidant and anti-inflammatory properties. So they fight against oxidative stress. They fight the free radicals. And they're loaded with vitamins, minerals, and something called phytochemicals, which are plant-based, biologically active compounds. Now, you've heard this before, examples of complex carbs and simple carbs. So I think we kind of know the difference between eating whole grains versus pastry. But, as I mentioned, this is what these foods are associated with. And here's the challenge with simple carbs. They're linked to obesity, metabolic disorder, diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and chronic inflammation. So all of those comorbidities that plague older adults are linked to an influx of these simple carbs. But you might be wondering about wheat bread. Where does wheat bread fit in? Yes, it can be a complex carb, or it can be a simple carb disguised as a good for you carb. So check your ingredients. The next time you buy a package of bread, unless you make your own, which is brilliant because then you can control what's in it, make sure that the first ingredient either says whole grain or whole wheat. So that means that you're actually getting the grain that hasn't been stripped of its nutrients. If your bread looks like this, the first ingredient is wheat, guess what? That's just white bread that's just been kind of disguised as something healthy, and it's really not that good for you. Mm-hmm. Now, I also find that people avoid carbs because they want to lose weight. And I'm going to tell you right now that that just hasn't been proven. I'm going to show you a study here. This was something called the Diet Fit study. And basically the same group of people ate a healthy low-fat diet for 6 months, and then they ate a healthy low-carb diet for 6 months. And our researchers at Stanford wanted to see who lost more weight. And as you can see, the groups lost about the same weight. These graphs look almost identical. What's interesting to me is this little tail at the top, which shows that there were actually some people who gained weight on both. So you may be a hyper responder to carbs, and you might gain weight if you eat too many carbs. You might be a hyper responder to even healthy fats. You might gain weight if you eat too many healthy fats, but that's not really the norm. That's not for most people. And it's something called bioindividuality, and that's part of why one diet doesn't fit all, because we respond a little bit differently. But I sadly see people avoiding healthy carbs when it's just unnecessary. And it's not good for them. Okay, the last two I'm going to cover are fatty fish and dairy, because it didn't fit neatly into this other picture I had, but fatty fish is interesting because it's a protein and it's also a good source of healthy fat. The benefit of fatty fish, and when I say that, I mean salmon and tuna and sardines, is that it contains something called omega-3 fatty acids. They are essential. We need to eat them. Our body doesn't produce them. And there's a very specific kind of fatty acid that's in fatty fish. It's called DHA. DHA, I think we're going to see a lot more published about it in upcoming years. It is associated with better brain health, better cardiovascular health, strong anti-inflammatory effect. And here's the bonus. It's a good source of vitamin B, which is one of those vitamins that we need more of as we age because we don't absorb it as well. If people are vegan or vegetarian, they can get omega-3 fatty acids from soy, flax seeds, chia seeds, and even walnuts. Just note that it's slightly different type called AHA, and it hasn't been associated as much with heart health. So fatty fish, I think, is really important. Here are some other sources of vitamin B, and it's mostly meat and cheese and fish. If you're a vegetarian or vegan, you'd have to eat an awful lot of mushrooms. It's in dried porcini mushrooms, but you'd need a lot. So this is a place where I would say if you're vegan or vegetarian that you would consider supplementing. Okay, dairy. You know, I told you nutritionists don't all agree. They're miles apart on dairy. People saying it's good for you, it's bad for you. So I'm going to give you my research-based opinion. If you like milk, drink milk. I would stick with the low fat kind or no fat. I actually prefer no fat because we don't need that much saturated fat. We need to minimize that in our diets. If you don't want to drink cow's milk or goat's milk, there's a lot of nut-based milks out there. There's almond milk, cashew milk. I drink both just because I like the flavor. Almond milk is going to have less protein, but more calcium, in part because it's fortified with calcium. And I think people get enough protein from other sources. However, from other sources. Let me just show you the food that I think everybody should be eating in the dairy family, which is yogurt. Now, and I would recommend a non-fat, non-sweetened yogurt that you can sweeten with a little bit of honey or fruit. Yogurt is so important because it's a probiotic. Next time you buy yogurt, take a look at the ingredients. Each container has over 1 billion bacteria. And that might sound scary, but eating those bacteria are very important for our gut health. So yogurt is one kind of probiotic. Again, I have a whole presentation on gut health, but it's fermented foods. So this is kimchi, this is pickled beets, this is a drink called kombucha, sauerkraut. These are brined pickles. So these are a few examples of probiotic foods. But this combination of prebiotic foods and probiotic foods help keep the gut healthy. And we're learning more and more about its importance as we age. So again, healthy microbiota, less healthy microbiota. All right. I have given you a lot of information. Anna and Martha, I'm going to ask you to play along. I'm going to show you a slide and I'll go over these. And I'm going to have you pick at least one thing that you would eat more of. And if you want something you might eat less of for better health. So whole grains like brown rice, farro, barley, nuts and seeds, fatty fish, beans and legumes, your vegetables, your olive oil, your fruits, and then also yogurt. Of the eat more category, is there something you might change now with your diet where you might try to work a little bit more in?
Mm, maybe the whole rice. I don't I don't eat rice, but
Oh,
if it's good for the health, I might
yeah.
include it because
A
I
lot
love
of
it.
Yeah, a lot of people they avoid it. I would avoid white rice because it's a simple carb, but brown rice, white rice, brown rice, wild rice. You can get rice and quinoa mixed. That's great.
The rest,
How
I
about
think that's my diet, pretty much. And my break in the diet is below.
okay, what's the one that stumps you, Anna? Which is the one that
The
you eat
pastries,
too
the
much?
pastries.
The
Martha
pastries.
knows me. The
Yeah.
pastries. Mhm.
Yeah, and I, like I could do a whole presentation on added sugar, but that's part of the problem here. So this is red meat, fast and fried food, butter and margarine, pastries, cheese, and I added this one, prepared foods. You know, we go to the frozen TV dinner or lean cuisine section, and we pull out those meals that look healthy, but they're really not because a lot of the nutrients are taken out of them and a lot of sodium is added. How about you, Martha? I want you to
For
play
me, I
along.
would have more beans because here in Brazil, we have the habit to have
Excellent.
only black beans.
Yeah.
And I like black beans, but it's not the thing that I like to eat, and I don't have it every day. But we have more beans like white, red, and lots of different qualities. And it's a thing that I'm not going into. I don't know why. It's
Yeah.
not in my diet. So I would like to try more beans because it's not a thing that I eat lentils, but not beans.
Yeah.
And
But
More
that's
beans
not
would
the
be great.
same, no? It's not the same, Sally.
A bean is a lentil, but a lentil isn't necessarily a bean. So a lentil could be a pea, for example.
Oh,
yes,
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. And
but
you
and
mentioned,
I like beans. When I have some or I have to go to a restaurant and someone offered me, I like it, but I don't have the habit to do it at home. So
yeah, that's a good one. But beans are, oh my God, they're good for you on so many levels. And you mentioned white beans. White beans, interestingly enough, are a good source of calcium. So who would have thought that? And Martha, how about you? Is there one here that you might need to eat a little less of in the body?
I have two sins in this bottle. One is the pastry as well because I love sugar, and the other is cheese because I love cheese
Yeah,
a
me
lot.
too. Me too. Cheese.
So Martha, I have to tell you, I love cheese too. And I have
I
to
love
really
cheese.
work at not putting cheese on everything, because I could. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think you're not alone with that. Okay. So I have just a couple final tips and then we'll wrap. Eating well for life, it means making better choices most of the time, not all of the time. So, ladies, if you're eating well for the most part, then once in a while, enjoy that piece of cake. Well,
Sounds
maybe
great.
not that piece of cake, maybe that piece of cake.
Okay.
But you understand what I mean. I think we should love our food. We should love to eat. We should celebrate it. But we can make better choices that are going to also keep us healthier and help us age better. So here is my email. I welcome people listening to this to contact me with questions. I get all sorts of questions. I love them and I'm happy to answer them. But I'll ask you, Anna and Martha, do you have a couple questions for me?
No, I just have a comment. I was amazed to discover now through your presentation that almond milk has calcium, and I thought that anyway it was a fake milk. But now when you know that almond milk was just, I mean, it was of course coming from almonds, but it wouldn't be rich in calcium.
And that's because it's fortified. It's fortified, at least here in the US, like breakfast cereal is fortified with, vitamin D, for example. So definitely look at the nutrition label. But here, in part of why I start my morning with oatmeal and almond milk, and part of why I do it is because I get almost at least half the calcium I need just from a bowl of oatmeal with almond milk.
Great.
And I have a question, Sally. We especially me, I've been heard a lot about intermittent fasting. That's the thing that everyone is doing now for losing weight or for feeling better or for decrease the anti-inflammatory reaction of the body. And I would like to know your opinion. I don't know what do you think about this, because especially here in Brazil, there is a kind of a trend of fashion about everyone is making like intermittent fasting. And this is my question, but before the question, I loved your presentation, especially because the thing that you said in the end of it, that you can make choice most of the time. I think this gives to me some kind of freedom that I can do most of the time, not all of the time, because it's a kind of a slavery that we are obsessed with good food and the counting calories. And I love when you said you can make good choices most of the time. So thank you for this word, most.
Yes, absolutely. But I have a strong point of view on intermittent fasting. And the main thing is that it's relatively recent in terms of its popularity, and it hasn't been studied extensively. So when I try to present data, I'm looking at what are the randomized clinical trials, or at least the observational studies, what has been tested in humans versus on mice. And so I'm actually looking for that body of research. Now, with intermittent fasting, there's about 50 different protocols for it. So it means so many different things. So that's why it's hard to say, oh, yes, intermittent fasting is good for X or Y. I'll give you a couple of pieces of data. Probably the aspect of it that has been studied the most is like restricted time feeding. And so people stop eating for a certain window of time, either, let's say, 12 hours or 16 hours. And probably the one that's been studied the most is the 12-hour protocol, which means that you stop eating at 7 at night and you don't start again until 7 in the morning. Now, I have not seen any data that show why that helps you lose weight, except for the fact that you stop eating. And so many people eat like unconsciously in front of the TV at night. So if you stop eating and ingesting calories, yes, you will lose weight. There's a researcher out of USC, his name is Walter Longo, Longo, and he's studying this with respect to aging and cellular aging. And I'm less familiar with all of his research, but I think the main thing is that if intermittent fasting and restricting the time that you eat helps you eat less, then that, and you need to lose weight, then that's good. But it's not like that's going to magically help everybody.
Sally, you didn't. Thank you. You didn't ask. You didn't talk about time. When you should eat, ideally, each meal. But another tendency I see, and a big difference between our eating patterns and schedules in Brazil and Americans, is that Americans at 5 p.m., 6 p.m., they are having dinner. And here, this is a snack for us. Then we usually, the Brazilian will have dinner at 7:38, if not at 9. It's very, very late. And then after a certain age, like you said already, we have problems digesting. And of course, if you're not exercising, walking, you're just in front of the TV and you just had a big dinner, you might have reflux and other problems, right? So I really now I'm very aware and concerned about this Brazilian habit that I think it should be banned after a certain age. What do you think
And
about this?
And it's so ingrained in the culture. And when we as Americans, go overseas, I had a lovely, lovely time in Mallorca, in Barcelona. But
I
I'm
will
like,
talk about
what do you mean
Spain. That's at
what
10
do you mean
o'clock.
you can't
Spain,
eat till 10
they
o'clock at night?
they have dinner very much later than us. I remember. Yeah.
So, there's just real briefly there's so many different philosophies about the timing of meals. And I'm sure you've heard, eat like a king at breakfast and, a pauper, I don't know, a pauper at lunch, where you're trying to eat your biggest meal at breakfast, smaller at lunch and smaller at dinner. And that's not practical for most people. I have found that there are individual responses to it. I'm a small person. I'm an active person. I eat small meals throughout the day. I used to think, oh, everybody should do that. But the scientific evidence doesn't support that. That's not necessarily, what's best for everyone. But there is a challenge eating large meals right before bed because it does disturb your sleep and your digestion.
Okay, great. Oh, Sally, thank you so much. It was a great presentation. Very, very informative. I learned a lot today.
Me too.
Well, thank you. I had a ball doing it, ladies. Invite me back because I have other presentations and I'd
We
love to continue
definitely
working with you.
will. This is so important for our audience to be learning also, and we definitely want you back.
Thank you so much.
We're
And
gonna talk.
all my best wishes to you. Bye now.
Thank you. Bye, Sally.
Thank you.
Bye
Bye-bye.
bye. It was a pleasure. Oops.